show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and the Bad Ideas episode this week is brought to you by our featured patron, Ryan G. Brown.
Thanks, Ryan.
Tony's got the bad idea for this week. Tony, what do you got for us?
We're going to be talking about the missionary work of John Chau and his trip to Sentinel Island.
I heard about this. This is very topical.
Yeah, it's like we went from threatened last week to this, so we've been a little bit more up on the times. Usually we're going like 1800 stuff, but some modern things have been bad ideas too.
Spoilers, he dies.
Yeah, it was not a very fruitful trip for Mr. John Chau. In the Bay of Bengal, there remains a tribe that has been almost entirely uncontacted by modern society. A mere 50 people are on this island, which is about the size of Manhattan, and the Indian government has instituted a ban on visiting them. There's a 3-mile buffer zone that's supposed to be respected, and they even have patrols occasionally go and try to enforce this. Most of this is because there's no reason to bother this mostly uncontacted tribe, but also because in the past few decades, anyone who has visited this island has been greeted with a barrage of death by arrows. This might be because in the past a few of their tribe was abducted by British explorers and brought to the mainland where they promptly died due to disease. It is believed that even a small viral infection could wipe this tribe out, and they are trying to preserve this, even though it might not be a sustainable population at this point.
So they're worried at this point that because these guys have been so isolated for so long that they don't have any of the immunities that most of the world population does from just regular stuff like the flu and the common cold and maybe other things that we wouldn't really worry about, but because they haven't encountered anybody with that type of stuff for so long, they might not have those antibodies, and even something that would be simple to us would just straight up kill them.
Yeah, that's one of the main things. It's also that there is anthropological significance to this tribe, where anytime you have an uncontacted tribe, there's interesting things that you can study about the early roots of humanity and so on. But it's interesting because this island is so isolated that even the other indigenous people in these archipelagos don't know anything about their language. There's been a very, very long time where they've been completely isolated here, and they just haven't left.
I want to go. I want to go now, Tony.
Good luck with that.
You said that nobody knows anything about them. I'm just saying, like, as a human person who is interested in things that I don't know, I'm like, yeah, but what's up with that?
Yeah, I kind of wonder if they have like drones or anything occasionally go over and just do like studies.
If they don't, then the whole thing about knowing things about how people behave in other types of society that haven't been quote-unquote infected by the rest of the world is kind of pointless because you can't know anything about it.
There have been a few expeditions that have contacted this tribe, but they've been very few and far between. Like, even as late as 2006, like, the people that have gone to this island have just been shot by arrows. I believe there was one contact with an anthropologist that was actually successful, but that was not for multiple days. That was just a very, very quick thing that happened. Now, insert John Chau, an American missionary. This young man had a wanderlust that could not be sated by simple missions trips to third world nations. When he was in high school, he decided that he would be the one to bring the gospel to the Sentinelese people. Using his sports science major from Oral Roberts University, he would tell them about the modern world. Usually with the help of his Perky Jerky sponsor.
What?
Yeah, Perky Jerky sponsored him because he had a pretty awesome Instagram, because he did travel the world. He had a pretty lit Instagram, I'm not gonna lie.
Wait. He was sponsored by caffeinated beef jerky.
Yes.
To go tell an unvisited native tribe about Jesus.
Yes.
I'm a fan of Jesus. I don't usually that his business needs to be mixed up with caffeinated beef jerky, which I am also a fan of.
Yeah, I've had Perky Jerky before. It's not as good as other jerkies, but that little caffeine boost sells it a bit more. I had turkey Perky Jerky, though, so I don't know if it was just that it was turkey. That's a weird jerky.
It sounds so good, though, to just say all those words in a row.
That's probably the only reason they jerkied the turkey.
And made it perky.
Yes.
We have to keep talking about this guy who died, but holy crap, I did not expect for there to be a beef jerky angle to this story, Tony.
Well, I don't think that they specifically sponsored this trip because he kept it very secret, even from his family members, because he didn't want them to try to stop them. I'm not disparaging mission work because there are a lot of people that genuinely want to go, they want to help, they want to build homes, they want to help with orphan kids. There's a lot of good things that can come from missionary work, but sometimes there's just a bad choice in where you're going. This is basically the Dark Souls of evangelical work. In his journal, he asked if this was Satan's last stronghold, and he felt it was his duty to change that.
I've got bad news for this guy. Satan has lots of strongholds still.
Generally, when ships approached the island, the Sentinelese people would come and fire arrows in the direction of the ship, which is usually sufficient warning for people to move on. After the Indian tsunami that happened, I believe it was 2004, they were even firing arrows at helicopters that went to just see if everybody was okay. So, John Chau actually had to bribe a bunch of fishermen to drop him off in a boat about 1.5 miles from the shore of the island. This was the closest the fishermen would get because they knew it was strictly off limits.
And they didn't want to get shot with arrows.
Yeah, because fishermen have been killed by getting a little bit too close to the island. There's actually been a shipwreck on this island before where the people narrowly escaped. So it's a little bit sketchy anytime you get to this particular island. And John Chau had actually done this a few times. Like, he wanted to be perceived by these people as non-threatening. He believed that his 5'6", 135-pound frame made him better for this job than a lot of other people because he wouldn't be perceived as threatening. So he, in his kayak, went to the shore wearing only a speedo and holding his Bible. When he landed on...
Was the speedo sponsored by Perky Jerky, Tony?
I don't know. Like, it might have been a Perky Jerky for the speedo, which is just an awful, awful idea. Like, where do they put the logo?
There keep being little sidebars in the story that I'm just not... Why would you do this? What is non-threatening about a speedo? I'm more likely to shoot somebody with an arrow if they're using a speedo.
Yeah, it's just not, like, it's kind of an alpha move to, like, be confident enough to be in a speedo in front of other people.
Yeah, I guess if you're thinking maybe they don't... I don't know what their society is like, but sort of the stereotypical tribal society, they're probably not wearing that many clothes. Maybe he's trying to say, hey, look, I can be like y'all and only cover up some of the stuff, but not everything like all those other people who came through. But
and they definitely were not wearing that much clothes.
It just seems like a weird move. I don't know if... this seems like a bad idea, Tony. Why are you telling us about this?
He got out of the boat and began to throw fish towards the Sentinelese people. He wanted to bring a gift of food so that they would know his intentions were good.
This is horrifying. I understand this guy did die. And I actually, like, on some level, I appreciate his motives. But the vision of a guy in a Perky Jerky speedo hurling fish at angry natives...
while yelling out in broken Senegalese, which is not what they speak.
Yeah, what? Okay.
As he was trying to make contact with them, the Sentinelese people started looting his kayak, pulling the valuables out, and eventually they just took the kayak and dragged it into the woods. When he reached the shore, a child promptly fired an arrow through his Bible. We know about this particular trip because Chau left a few diary entries with the fishermen in case the worst happened. He said of his experience, I stumbled back, recalling yelling at the child for shooting at me. Looking back on it, my Bible cover looked like tree bark, so maybe he was just curious. But yikes, it sure gave me a fright.
This guy is way too naive.
Yeah, very, very much so. And that's what most of the people who talk about this afterwards are saying. Like, there's a lot of people in missionary work where that was directly their thoughts on how naive he was to just go and do this.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be willing to sacrifice yourself for something that you believe in. That's not the aspect of this that I think is dumb. It seems like he just wasn't well prepared or thinking clearly about how other people might perceive him. Like, really? You think this kid shot an arrow at you because your Bible looked like tree bark? What is even that logic?
It just doesn't make sense, but he was trained by a Kansas group called All Nations and their church planting experience, where basically you go into the wilderness and a bunch of white people walking around with spears pretend to be natives, and you're supposed to teach them about the gospel as they like yell at you in languages that don't exist. And he thought that this was proper enough experience to actually be able to spread the gospel. And he had done missionary work in like Iraq and a lot of other places. He'd been all over the world doing this, so he had some experience. But he just was clueless on like how to deal with an uncontacted tribe.
Yeah, and I know that there's going to be, like, an anthropologist would have none of his interests, so they would just say, well, don't go, and you might not have that kind of perspective. I gotta respect a little bit that he tried to prepare. I mean, I'm not gonna the character of the preparations that he took as far as running. Like, that's better than some people do when they're gonna go do something stupid. He at least knew that it was gonna be difficult.
Yeah, and some of the missions people were talking about how, in all honesty, he should have gone to a part of the beach that was unoccupied, set up a small camp, and sat there quietly waiting for them to approach him instead of coming up in a boat and yelling at people.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of things with his approach that just wasn't quite right. At this point, Chau had to swim back to the fishing vessel as they were preparing to leave. He convinced them to stay another day so that he could go back the next day and see if he could continue this mission's work.
Wait, I have to say, the fact this guy can swim a mile, it's tipping me back towards a little bit more respect for him.
Yeah, that's not easy, especially in the ocean water. Like,
Again,
who knows what's going on?
Clearly not a wimp.
Yeah, and from what I was reading, it sounds like the fishermen might have gone a little bit closer because they're the reason why we know that he was hit by a bunch of arrows. And if you're looking, like, even through binoculars from a mile, you're not going to see that much. So everything said a mile, but I think this might have been them like trying to keep themselves out of trouble. Which, by the way, eventually they get charged with accessory to murder because of this. So the fishermen are in a ton of trouble because they helped him get here.
I would continue with the story because I'm interested to hear how that happened.
Before all this had happened, like, I kind of got out of order because I was talking about the All Nations group. One of the things that they did have him do was stay in a hotel for like 12 days, trying to make sure that he detoxed himself so that he wouldn't be like bringing anything extra. That's not exactly how viruses work, but it is nice that he isolated himself and didn't pick up anything new while he's in a foreign country to bring to them. But
they do that.
Did have that in mind.
That's how astronauts do it, right? They keep them in isolation for a couple of weeks ahead of going up to the space station to hopefully mitigate the possibility of them having colds or whatever that they could bring up there and wreck the whole space station.
Yeah, I imagine throwing up in a space station would be one of the stranger, horrible experiences a person could have.
And I'm also sure that it's happened.
Yeah, it happened during the moon missions. Like, apparently it just formed this orb and slowly moved over and slapped another astronaut, like, right in the chest.
That's not the bad idea we're talking about, Tony.
Let's
Sidebar bad idea. Throwing up in space.
This time, unfortunately, when he would go back to the island, a group of men would come up and immediately kill him with a barrage of arrows. Last the fishermen saw, he was pelted and they dragged his body directly into the woods. It quickly went from him, like, naively trying to, like, contact these people to bring them to share his beliefs with them, to basically bring them the gospel, to outright murder right away, which the Indian government has written up murder charges against the Sentinelese people, but it's not believed that there's going to be anything ever done that would actually go and arrest somebody or anything like that. You'd be very, very hard-pressed to find out exactly who did it.
Yeah, although we should say murder is still wrong. Yeah, even if you're like wrong. An isolated society, still not cool.
But in their view, like, they have a right to defend themselves. In the past, whenever people have come, they've literally abducted people off of their island. So I kind of understand why they're a little bit clannish.
Yes,
but it is still wrong to outright murder somebody.
It's a weird line, sort of, between castle doctrine and, not that they would have that exact term or possibly the exact concept, but hey, this is our area. They're probably a relatively small community, so it's everybody knows everybody else.
Yeah, it's 50 people. Everybody very much knows everybody.
So you're protecting yourself and your small community from outsiders. Whether or not they legitimately pose a threat, you could credibly believe that there is a threat if you're coming from a society like that. So it's a weird area.
And what is the castle doctrine?
Castle doctrine is essentially if somebody attacks you in your home, you're allowed to use lethal force to defend yourself.
I see. Yeah, and that's pretty much what's going on here. Plus, you have to think about in history, if boats showed up on your shore and they wanted to like start a fight, you were pretty much like forced into that. It was very rare that boats showing up on your shore would end up being a good thing. The evangelical community seems to be split, with some demanding justice and better enforcement of the 3-mile buffer of the island and wanting the tribe to answer for its crimes. Other groups seem to blame Chau for being naive and egotistical, thinking that he would be the one to break through. And on a side note, his parents have made a statement about this, and they completely forgave the tribe. They think that like he was trying to spread love, and they just didn't understand, and it was their way. So they did end up forgiving this. That doesn't change the legal ramifications on any of this, but it like the family understood what like that this is what he wanted to do with his life, and it did end up costing him. A former professor and the dean at Christian Wheaton College in Illinois said, "I'm appalled by the naivete of thinking you go on a beach, you throw fish at some people, you holler at them, and then come back and spend the night and everything is going to be fine. It doesn't show much sensitivity and it doesn't show much common sense." Benjamin Corey, who studies missionology at Fuller Technical Seminaries, said, "The death of Chau epitomizes the rogue and arrogant mindset that many of us who still remain in Christianity are trying to correct. Inconsiderate and reckless actions such as this tarnish the efforts many others have made and are making. Most of the individuals I know that and have studied alongside are thoughtful and committed to making the world a better place in tangible ways, from medical doctors serving in parts of the world where medicine is desperately needed to poverty relief efforts and many other legitimate praiseworthy missionary initiatives. Chau, on the other hand, represents an overzealous kid who probably read stories of missionaries from generations past and decided he wanted to emulate all the wrong people. He was foolish, he represents a horrific lack of education or even accountability to minds older and wiser than his. And he could have been killed by the very people he claimed to care about." And he was.
There's a weird sort of split in my thinking here, because a lot of people would just say that leave him alone completely, nobody should ever go here, but I am somewhat sympathetic to his intentions here, and anybody who goes with a message of the gospel is trying to change other people's way of thinking and culture to their way of thinking and culture, and I don't personally see that as the worst thing ever, but I do think that you have to approach that mission with a lot of thoughtfulness and carefulness and be wise about how you enter into those kind of situations. So as someone who personally believes in Christianity and the power of the gospel, I still think this could have been done better.
Yeah, and as someone who doesn't believe that, like, I think that they should have been left alone, but it's like, it's a difference that Al and I are going to have on this sort of thing. But I'm also not offended whenever I see people being missionaries, so. We're at different parts of the spectrum there, but it's also like I understand what he was trying to do. I was in that world for most of my childhood, so it's like I've felt that mindset before. And it's a very powerful compulsion, especially for someone that's as idealistic as he is. Perhaps the bad idea here could be best summed up as, don't expect people who are so far removed from a society to share your morals, such as, like, these people will fight to the death over their island. Or perhaps don't expose indigenous people to potentially fatal bacteria and viruses, if you want to go from that angle. Or maybe even don't let your ego think that you are protected from people who obviously do not take in outsiders. There are a lot of bad ideas here with John Chau, and he was at least moderately cognizant of them. In one of his final diary entries, he wrote, "I'm scared, watching the sunset, and it's beautiful, crying a bit, wondering if it will be the last sunset I ever see." And so, even with that mindset, he decided that he was going to go back to the island, and that's a level of dedication that most people will never have for anything. And in some ways it's respectable, and in some ways it's just so completely naive that it's hard to fathom being in that spot for me.
Yeah, I respect the dedication. There are things that are worth sacrificing your life for, in my opinion. But if you can avoid sacrificing your life, that would be good too, because these people aren't any better off having killed him.
Yeah.
And he's certainly not any better off being dead now. So
yeah, and in his journal, he wrote, "I think that I would be better suited to live, but if this is where I die, I guess that's where I die." And it's like he he could be doing a lot of great work out there. If nothing else, he was a very nice guy that people loved to connect with. Like all the people around him talked about how he had this magnetic personality, and that's probably why he was well suited for missionary work. He cared about what he was doing, and people liked him. But like if there's no way of talking to these people, if there's no way of connecting, like it's just a waste. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say on this particular bad idea. Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you very much. If you enjoy this, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/humanechoes. Also, we do have this on its own YouTube channel now. We are separating bad ideas from Human Echoes just to try to get that sweet, sweet SEO and keep everything kind of localized.
Yeah, so if you're listening on the audio, nothing has changed. And if you're watching on YouTube and you're hearing this, you're in the right place. So
yeah,
good on you.
Yep. And we will talk to you guys very soon.
Bye.